Welcome to the ISF Podcast from the Information Security Forum. The ISF Podcast is hosted by ISF CEO Steve Durbin, and every episode he brings listeners features timely conversations, practical insights, and resources for global cybersecurity professionals. I'm producer Tavia Gilbert. This episode begins a special 4-episode series focusing on the ISF's latest report, Threat Horizon 2025, Scenarios for an Uncertain Future. Today, we offer an overview, setting the stage for this threat report. Then, over the next 3 weeks, we'll have a deeper discussion about each of the 3 major threat areas featured in the report. Steve, thanks for being here with me today. Nice to see you. Obviously, the future is unwritten. And in today's volatile world, that saying rings truer than ever. Organizations face a highly uncertain business environment with forces across politics, economics, technology, and beyond influencing what may happen over the coming years. There are many possible futures, and each offers opportunity for reward, but also, of course, for risk. In a highly interconnected and fragile ecosystem, security threats will emerge or evolve depending on the factors that sit beyond the control of any single organization or state. So, you're here to talk about the Threat Horizon report, and this year's report is a little different. I'll remind listeners here they can find this and past reports on securityforum.org, and our previous podcasts on past Threat Horizon reports are in our feed. But Steve, I want you to explain this year's report. How did you structure it, and why did you structure it in a new way, coming from a new perspective?
Yeah, sure. And thanks very much for introducing it that way, Tavia, because I think it is a change. It's an evolution. You know, the Threat Horizon is evolving. It has to evolve to reflect the needs of ISF members who increasingly are having to deal with the sorts of uncertainties that you spoke of. Managing risk, which is, I think, the fundamental that we're talking about here, managing risk is all about managing uncertainty. And that's something that business decision makers everywhere understand. Taking a scenario-based approach to identifying and preparing for possible future security threats should therefore resonate with that thinking and enhance initiatives, we hope, to communicate around information risk at the very highest levels of the organization. And all of that should result in better business discussions and, of course, better decision-making. Rather than making precise forecasts of future threats, which we've done in the past, Threat Horizon 2025, which we've called Scenarios for an Uncertain Future, explores a variety of known unknowns. By examining various possible future scenarios, it helps organizations to strategize, to prepare for whatever risks and opportunities lie ahead that are relevant to their businesses. Because to thrive in the unknown, organizations must be prepared for anything. We've seen that over the past few years, haven't we, with the pandemic and everything else that's taken us by surprise. With each possible future presenting a unique set of threats and impacts, scenario planning is a really good place to start in dealing with some of those uncertainties. And that just makes a lot of sense, doesn't it, to everybody? And so that's really is why we've redesigned the report in the way that we have, to try, I think, to get much closer to the way in which our audience is having to deal with all of these uncertainties.
So this year's report has been reimagined to help organizations identify and prepare for various potential security threats that could emerge in the coming years. And it focuses on 3 themes that will affect organizations in every geography and vertical industry. Those themes that you highlight are the future of work, the future of data, and the future of international relations.
Yeah, and I know we're going to be going into those in more depth in the next few episodes. But what's interesting is that all 3 of those, are really looming uncertainties, if I could put it that way, over how people are going to have to respond. So of how people are going to have to work, how's that going to change? Of how data is going to be governed and used. We're seeing so much more interest from regulators, for instance, in terms of how that's managed, particularly if we look at things like AI, for instance, privacy, that sort of thing. And then finally, how geopolitics and international relations will shape that overall global business environment. hugely important based on what we've seen just over the last 12 months, with all of the disruption to supply chains. So the way that critical uncertainties develop around each of those themes inevitably is going to shape the way that the world is in 2025. But organizations can't wait to see those outcomes in order to define their strategies. They must start preparing for the future now, moving ahead into the unknown. And that involves understanding the opportunities in each different scenario, but also the various associated potential threats. And it's the opportunities, I think, that are really important, because you and I have sort of laughed over the years about the threat horizon being probably one of the most miserable, frightening, pick an adjective.
Totally depressing.
So I think for us to be able to put that into much more of a scenario-based situational context where we can look at opportunities that are presented is really important. And the report, as always, offers guidance on actions to take in both the short and long term to deal with those threats and those opportunities.
I agree, and I am being a little facetious because it does always freak me out every year, but you always do provide guidance and show that every coin has a flip side. So every threat, while it may be hard to wrap your mind around how to handle it, there is an opportunity that accompanies that, or many opportunities, and I do appreciate that perspective. So we'll go into depth about each of these threats in the next few episodes, but I wanted to stop here to say that there are a few things that the report recommends every organization should do, no matter what the future holds. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's right. And these are recommendations that the ISF has been making for some while now. So they should sound familiar to listeners of this podcast and indeed our members. First, they need to ensure that data, information, and security governance functions are well equipped to oversee and deal with change. I make the point about being well equipped because clearly in recessionary times, there's always the temptation to cut back. They also need to keep control frameworks up to date, making sure that security basics are always in place.
And the report also talks a lot about workplace culture and building a culture of secure behavior, whether people are working remotely or in an office setting. And that's, I know, one of your favorite topics and something we've spent a lot of time discussing, especially but not limited to 2021, 2020, and beyond.
That's right. And it's going to continue to be important for businesses to understand the impact of changing regulations and, of course, the way that people react to those. And then there's the old favorite that we trot out from time to time, and that is that organizations absolutely have to build resilience into their supply chains.
Just yesterday, I heard on a news report a commentator saying nobody was talking about supply chains before the pandemic. And I thought, wait a minute. Steve Durbin and I have been talking about supply chains since this podcast started in 2015. So we are on the cutting edge.
Oh, and out there, way out there.
We knew what supply chains were, and super cool. We knew what supply chains were before it was cool to know what a supply chain was. So
we did. And, it's interesting that you say that, because we find that with so much of the work that we do at the ISF, because I suppose we work with so many of the world's leading organizations that are really out there at the forefront of some of these changes. We do pick up on these trends. We do identify them, and hopefully we've been able to provide some form of solution, some form of dealing with some of these things that our members have been able to really embed in their businesses before the situation has arisen. So supply chain is a great example. We've been talking about it for a very long time.
Yes, we have.
And there are lots of other specific recommendations too that are in the report that security functions and indeed business leaders may consider. In such a highly volatile and unpredictable world, it's everybody's job to help navigate a path to prosperity. But again, our hope with this report is that it really does help organizations prepare for multiple potential futures so that they're ready for anything. This report, and indeed the podcast episodes that we're putting out, are directed at those looking to explore future trends and developments, driving strategic conversations and proactive risk management. This can include and does include security leaders and strategists, as well as just generally interested parties beyond the security function, such as enterprise risk managers, corporate strategists, and of course, business leaders. The themes and scenarios are deliberately designed to be thought-provoking for both security and business-focused audiences. By placing security in context what the report does is raise awareness of security and, really importantly, its connection to business concerns.
And as always, in addition to talking about the threats the report highlights, we'll look at giving listeners some really practical tips and steps that are offered in the report. So, again, listeners, it won't all be doom and gloom, I promise. A little doom and gloom, but not overly much.
Doom and gloom free. Because each theme explored follows a pattern, which really does help readers and, in this case, listeners, to consider their own organizational context. And as I said before, prepare for many possible futures, which will contain significant opportunities. So, no, not just doom and gloom this time.
Not just doom and gloom. So we've got a lot to explore in these coming episodes, and I admit I am excited for this series, Steve, so we'll be back. Listeners, you can find the Threat Horizon Report 2025, Scenarios for an Uncertain Future, at securityforum.org. And you can go back to Threat Horizon reports from previous episodes of our podcast. You'll find those in our feed, and we'll link them in the show notes. Next week, Steve and I will take a deeper dive into the report, starting with the future of work. Location and technology collide. In the meantime, if you would take 10 seconds to pull up this podcast on whatever device you're listening, give us a 5-star rating and write a quick review, we'd be grateful. You can also listen to the ISF Analyst Insight podcast, which goes in depth on the hottest topics in information security. In every episode, ISF analysts hand-select active security professionals from ISF member organizations to discuss how the implementation of ISF research is uniquely applied to their real-world context. We hope you'll listen, and of course, we'll put a link to that show in our show notes. If there's a topic or question that you'd like us to cover in a future episode, let us know at securityforum.org, which is also where you can find our catalog of past video and podcast episodes, as well as ISF's research, practical tools, and guidance related to discussions like today's. The ISF podcast is produced by Talkbox and Tavia Gilbert, with senior producer Katie Flood. Mix and master by Kayla Elrod. Music by Alexander Filipiak. Thanks for listening.